Good morning, Senior Pride here. Um, Today I will be discussing a topic for which I need to give a warning. You may not want to watch this if you're uncomfortable with issues of death, particularly suicide. I'm going to be discussing elder abuse, the relationship to that and suicide in seniors housing. And as usual, I will be putting links in at the end. There's an issue of inadequate staff training that we need to address in relation to this. And this happens worldwide. This is not something that's focused on Canada or wherever. Uh, because the elder abuse tends to compromise the dignity, the safety, the basic needs of seniors, it can result in suicidal ideation or acts because of severe distress. Um, if it does not result in suicide, it may still result in things like depression, anxiety, feelings of extreme isolation. So anyway we look at it, elder abuse is a very dangerous thing. The population is aging, as we know, globally, and this is increasing the demand for seniors housing, for seniors facilities, supports. Um, because of this, there's been more attention to the systemic failures of these kinds of housing and supports. And one of the issues that has been is starting to be looked at least is elder abuse, and as well the relationship to inadequate staff training. Now remember that, like any other form of abuse, elder abuse can be physical, emotional, sexual, it can be financial exploitation, and it can be neglect. Because staff are often inadequately trained, it can result in just horrific outcomes such as suicide. So, what do we know about the forms of abuse that take place? Well, first of all, let me just give some basic definitions. Physical abuse is simply inflicting physical harm through hitting, shoving, or other violent actions. And believe me, it is not simple. It is very damaging, both physically and emotionally. Emotional abuse, so verbal assaults, humiliation, and isolating seniors. And this will or can erode the mental health of given residents. Sexual abuse is any non-consensual sexual act, or even touching, anything that is perpetrated against someone who may not be able to speak out. Financial exploitation. I think we've all heard of this. It's the misuse or theft of an elderly person's personal funds. And neglect. It's just what that is simply a failure to provide the basic necessities, so food, hygiene, medical attention, those sorts of things. Now, some of the abuse seems to stem from staff shortages. Some of it seems to stem from inadequate training, and some of it is perpetrated by people who enjoy controlling others. In relation to that, it does, as I said, lead to feelings of depression, anxiety, isolation, helplessness, and that can all lead to the inevitable, to suicide. So let's look at inadequate staff training. First of all, there's a lack of awareness. Untrained or poorly trained staff may fail to recognize the signs of abuse, neglect, or emotional distress in a resident. So they may not recognize those subtle changes that tell us that someone is starting to think of ending their life. There may be an inappropriate response. So staff may engage in inappropriate responses to people requesting, to residents' needs, and this will just exacerbate the feelings of isolation and depression. Um, there may be a mismanagement or mishandling of conflict. They may make enormous mistakes in how they interact with and handle residents with cognitive decline, and that ultimately can lead to abuse. There's also feelings of burnout and frustration among staff members. So untrained staff face a lot of stress due to the demanding issues involved in caregiving. And without having the coping mechanisms they need, it can result in neglect or, again, harm, whether intentional or unintentional. As well, we know that staff members in seniors' environments tend to lack access to adequate mental health support. So they may be ill-equipped to address the needs of the residents, and then when they're stressed out, they do not have the support to help them regain their grounding. And this increases the likelihood of abuse, which increases the likelihood of depression and suicide among senior residents. So let's look at it from the psychological perspective, which of course any of you who know that I was a psychologist know that this is something that matters to me. We know that there is a link between elder abuse and suicide. That has been documented. We need to look at the reasons why. First of all, there are psychological consequences to these behaviors, these abuses, which lead to things like loss of autonomy and dignity. So when you feel like you're powerless, when you feel like you're dependent, you are more likely to start to feel worthless and hopeless, and that will lead or can lead to suicidal ideation. There's also isolation and loneliness. Those who are abused are frequently isolated. They may be isolated by their abusers, or they may isolate themselves. And this leads to a lack of meaningful connections, which again heighten the risk of depression, sadness, suicide. There's also the issue of chronic stress and trauma. When people are exposed to abusive environments long term, they experience these feelings of chronic stress and trauma, and if they do not have a great deal of resilience, they may be more vulnerable to suicidal ideation and ultimately suicide. There may also be co-occurring mental health issues that have not been dealt with. So, depression or anxiety, they're surprisingly common among seniors and not dealt with. It's like we ignore them, both because the senior hides them and because society is not recognizing them. And it kind of creates this dangerous divergence of issues that can result in suicide. So I'm going to look at some case studies. So, for example, in the Journal of Elder Abuse and Neglect, they examined residents in senior housing who had reported emotional abuse. And what the researchers found was that 64% of these individuals exhibited signs of severe depression, with 20% of them expressing suicidal ideation. Another case study was looking at neglect leading to suicide, and essentially this was based on a widely reported incident where an elderly woman in a nursing home committed suicide after prolonged neglect by staff, which included failure to provide necessary medication and emotional support. So very basic stuff. It highlighted the critical need for better oversight and training in housing facilities. That we still have a long way to go, obviously, but this horrible incident kind of brought to the fore what can happen. Now, the World Health Organization estimates, as I've said this before, 1 in 6 people age 60 and older experience abuse in community or institutional settings. As I've also said before, that is probably an underestimate because people don't always report their experiences of abuse, and and we may not recognize the signs in older people. What they also reported was that among those experiencing abuse, the prevalence of suicidal ideation is significantly higher. And some studies have indicated that those rates are as high as 30%. So it's quite significant. It's also been noted that facilities with low staff to resident ratios report higher rates of abuse and neglect, which of course correlates with an increased risk of suicide attempts among their residents. So what can we do? Well, first of all, the obvious thing, comprehensive staff training. We need our seniors facilities to prioritize comprehensive staff training. We need them to focus on identifying and addressing signs of elder abuse. We need them to learn to manage residents' mental health needs, including suicide prevention. And conflict resolution and stress management techniques need to be taught. We need to improve staff ratios. So these housing environments where there is a low staff to resident ratio need to be altered so that there is a much more cohesive ratio where people don't burn out so easily. And it's important for governments and agencies to recognize this and to enact these protocols. Policy development and enforcement are obviously important. Now, facilities really must implement, but not only implement, enforce strict policies against elder abuse. And that includes mandatory reporting systems and regular audits. And by regular, I don't mean once every year or 2 years. I mean like every 2 or 3 months. Transparent accountability and mechanisms can deter abuse and promote a culture of safety. So the reality is, if people know they're going to have to hold to these policies, they are more likely to behave well. We also need to look at mental health support, and that needs to be for both residents and staff. That means like on-site counseling, peer support groups, crisis intervention, anything that will be proactive in supporting healthy environments. We need to encourage community and family involvement. And we know that there are many seniors who do not have those familial supports, so the community becomes that much more important. So it's important for those that do have family, to actively encourage them to participate in their seniors' care. This, among other things, it provides oversight. So if something is happening in the facility, the family becomes aware. Communities can also do this. So volunteer programs, for example, can help to decrease isolation and provide a support where a senior who is being abused may feel like they can speak out. We also need to integrate technology, and that means things like monitoring systems, digital reporting platforms. All of these things can enhance and ensure timely oversight and intervention into seniors' abuse. Now, there are obvious challenges to the implementation of all of these things. One of them is financial. Many seniors facilities, including the one I live in, operate on extremely limited budgets, and it makes it difficult to invest in things like staff training, mental health support, that sort of thing. There's a huge resistance to change in the senior support system. Institutions often resist change. They lack awareness of addressing the importance of elder abuse. They may actively ignore when they are informed that an elder is being abused. And we need to make them aware of this, how it relates to suicide, and we need to increase the adoption of these reforms, or reforms that exist already in our legislation. And of course, there are, in that regard, there are legal and regulatory issues. There are inconsistent regulations, enforcement mechanisms create all kinds of loopholes for people to work through, and it allows the incidence of abuse to continue and persist in many seniors facilities. You know, as I've said, there's this issue of lack of staff training. There's this issue of either unintentional or intentional abuses, and until and unless we make facilities more accountable, they will continue to engage in these behaviors, and there will continue to be an increasingly high incidence of suicide in seniors facilities. So we do need to take this seriously. It is life-threatening. With that, I remind you, if you enjoyed this video and found it educational, please hit subscribe and explore. Please share this video with those who might be interested. And I will, as I said, be putting links on at the end as well. Remember, and please remember, to be senior is to be proud. Hugs.